Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Martin, and welcome to the second episode of the COVID-19 Educator Guide. First, I just want to really thank everyone for all the positive feedback on the first video. I'm glad that it was well received, and I look forward to your feedback on this video as well. Before we get started with the video, I know that last time we spoke about the next video being I'm not eligible for ADA, now what? Um, and that's not going to be the video that I'm focusing on today for two reasons. First reason is that I want to choose some content, a topic that I thought would really connect to the previous video to maybe shed some light on that video. And then secondly, this particular topic, there's a couple of things I want to add to it. And I want to get a video out to you guys before we go on to Christmas break. And this particular video will not be ready until after we return. But I promise you it'll be worth the wait. It's really good information in there. So I hope you understand and look for it in January. So let's move into this topic. So the topic we're going to be focusing on today is let's talk HIPAA and FERPA. As I mentioned before, HIPAA and FERPA are actually the components, it's the ideas behind the information that we get connected to COVID-19. Too often, many school districts within this nation hide behind HIPAA and FERPA, and they use these two different topics as the focus as to why they can't share information about COVID-19, why they can't have a level of transparency that we all seek, and what's happening, why are we being quarantined, all those things really hinge on HIPAA and FERPA. So I wanted to spend a few minutes to really touch on both of these in hopes that we'll have a little bit of understanding as to how much information can you really have, and is our school districts being as transparent as probably they should be. And it's not quite a yes or no answer, but it definitely will enlighten you, and it's food for thought. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to begin by talking about HIPAA and FERPA. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. The whole concept behind HIPAA, it's really a set of privacy rules and standards that address the use and disclosure of individuals' health information. All right, so it's supposed to protect your health information. And normally, this information is held by a medical provider. So normally when you hear the word HIPAA, you're at your doctor's office or your dentist's office, and the information in context is normally has a medicinal, a medical connection to it. So there's a set of privacy rules that are tied towards around HIPAA. And there are standards for individuals' privacy rights to understand and control how their health information is used. The whole concept behind HIPAA is to empower you to protect your information and have some control over what is dispersed to whomever. But HIPAA is normally protected for the person whose medical records we're focusing on, but it's also the individual who gives you the HIPAA compliance and says, I'm going to be in HIPAA compliance, is a medical professional. Now, FERPA, on the other hand, is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's a federal law that protects the privacy of a student's educational records. So this is more in context to an educational facility, a school, that if there's educational records that are connected to a student, those records are protected under FERPA. So the law applies to all schools that receive funds under an applicable program of the U.S. Department of Education. So if you're receiving this specific funding from the U.S. Department of Education, which most schools are, then you must protect the information of the students under FERPA. FERPA gives parents certain rights with respect to their children's education records. These rights transfer to the student when he or she reaches the age of 18 or attends a school beyond the high school level. All right, so that's good information. Parents normally are the ones who are executing FERPA. They're saying, this can or cannot be disseminated. Information can or cannot be disseminated for my child. and parents are normally the ones who execute those rights. However, when a student turns 18, they can do it for themselves, and that's something that's important to note. Students to whom the rights have transferred are eligible students, right? So that means any student who's 18 years of age, they can execute these rights themselves. So we get the basics about HIPAA and FERPA. We know HIPAA is normally a medical connection. You're at a doctor's office. FERPA is more of an educational institution. The commonality between the two of them is that they both protect the records, right? HIPAA is normally medical. FERPA normally deals with educational records. All right, so let's get to the next thing. The question I'm posing is, does the HIPAA privacy rule apply to an elementary or secondary school? Now, you might ask, why am I asking this question? Why does it matter if HIPAA is executed at a high school, elementary school? Who cares? Well, this is normally the conversation that surrounds COVID. When you have individuals who are trying to find information out about COVID-19 records, about how many kids in school districts are COVID-19 positive, how many adults, however it might be, who are COVID-19 positive. School districts tend to evoke HIPAA in order to protect the privacies of those students. So the question is actually wrapped around, can they do that? Does HIPAA protect school districts from disseminating information to the general public about the students who are within their schools? And the answer is generally no. Let me move my face over here. So generally no. In most cases, the HIPAA privacy rule does not apply to an elementary or secondary school because the school either is not a HIPAA covered entity, which means you're not a medical provider. Very few schools are offering medical services to students to which they have to protect the information that's within that school. And then secondly, is HIPAA covered entity is a HIPAA covered entity but maintains health information only on students and records that are by definition education records under FERPA, and therefore is not subject to the HIPAA privacy rule. So this one portion here is basically saying there are some schools, and honestly there probably are a lot of schools, who hold medical records about students, and therefore in essence might be a HIPAA covered entity. But the issue is that that information, that medical records about that child, is actually being held as a part of their educational records, and therefore falls under the auspices of FERPA. Let me dig a little bit deeper into that. So what I mean by that is, if we were providing a medical service as a school, if we're only maintaining and keeping that information because or the school district is the medical provider for that child, then that will be HIPAA. But in most instances, that's not the case. What we're doing is we receive medical records from students for the purposes of making educational decisions. And when we do that, they fall under the auspices of educational records because we're using that information for that kid's IEP to determine what type of services does he or she need. And we're only really getting that information for educational purposes. So therefore, it falls under the auspices of FERPA. And therefore, HIPAA is really outside of its control. We're not using it for that. So HIPAA is out for that situation as well. So 1 and 2 are both telling us that most schools are not protected under HIPAA. So if a school district says, I can't provide information because, HIPAA, now generally, that's not true. All right, so next slide. FERPA rights can be amended in an emergency. So that's important to know that although we're saying now most of the educational decisions that we're making when it comes to can we know about this child's COVID information or not, doesn't fall under HIPAA. It falls under the protections of FERPA. So during COVID-19 specifically, institutions may determine that they need to disclose personal identifying information from a student's education record in order to effectively manage an emergency situation. So there is language within FERPA that says that an educational institution, a high school, a middle school, elementary school, can divulge a child's information if it's an emergency situation, which COVID-19 is. So FERPA does permit such disclosure without written consent if it is indeed in connection with a health or safety emergency. So this information can be disclosed. Doesn't mean that we get as much information as we probably would like, but we do get a decent amount of information, and there's no reason that entities cannot ask for that information as long as it falls under the rights that you can of disclosure under FERPA. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. So typically, law enforcement officials, public health officials, trained medical personnel, and parents, including parents of an eligible student, are the types of appropriate parties to whom P2 from education records may be disclosed under this FERPA exception. So let's dive into that. So if a law enforcement individual or a public health person or a trained medical professional or a parent needs to have this information, it can be disclosed. So we can know certain things about the individual, and we'll dig into that in a second. So what I want to focus on is the parents, including parents of eligible students, can know more. So if you're a parent, I imagine, of a child who's been exposed to another child who has COVID-19, then under an emergency situation, there may be some details that can be divulged to you as that parent as to what exactly do you need to know in order to protect the interests of your child. So let's go a little bit further. Can a school disclose information about the student's illness under FERPA to other students and their parents without consent? The answer is it depends, but generally yes, right? So you might say, well, that's mind blowing. I didn't know that I could get information about another parent's child under FERPA. It seems like it's counterintuitive to the whole concept of what FERPA is, to release information. I hear you. But under certain situations, such as COVID-19, information can be disclosed in ways that it normally would not be. So only if that information is a non-personally identifiable form, right? So if I can find out information about the student, but not know his or her name, or certain identifiable information about him or her. So if an educational agency or institution discloses information about a student in non-personally identifiable form, then consent by the parents or eligible students is not needed under FERPA. So for example, if an educational agency or institution releases the fact that the individuals are absent due to COVID-19, but does not disclose their identities, this would generally not be considered personally identifiable to the absent students under FERPA, as long as there are other individuals at the educational agency or institution who are absent for other reasons. So let's dig into that a little bit. So I think what we're saying here is the whole conversation around under quarantine in the gradebook. This is where that comes from. That I can say that a certain student is under quarantine as long as he or she is not the only individual in the school who's under quarantine. That would generally make it clear to everyone that the student has COVID-19. So as long as there are multiple students, as long as there's enough individuals who we can disguise who the general information of most of the kids, then it falls under FERPA as being okay, that we can do that. All right, so this information generally could probably be disclosed to news media or to parents or to the general public, because FERPA has safeguards in it that protects that person's identity, but it also has enough flexibility that in an emergency situation like this, we can get that very general information that will protect the general safety of everyone involved. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this is something that allow you to empower yourselves at your work site and be comfortable to ask an additional question, knowing that FERPA has limitations and you have certain rights as an individual. The next video, once again, is going to be I'm not eligible for ADA, now what? I'm really excited to bring this content to you, this episode, next episode to you, just because I feel like it's really at its most basic level, something that so many people are dealing with within our school district. They've either been denied ADA accommodations for whatever reason, and so like, now what? Or they didn't apply for ADA because they don't feel like they have a disability, but they do feel like they have something, whether it's their child or that they have to take care of, or a relative that they need to take care of, or there's something happening in their lives and they would like to have some type of accommodation from their work site that doesn't fall under ADA. And what do I do in those situations? Well, this video is for all of us who are in those situations. So I'm excited about it. Please check back in January so we can have that larger discussion about what can you do, because you can do things. ADA is not the end of the road, and there's tons of things we can do to advocate for ourselves. Please have an amazing holiday. Get rest, be safe, enjoy yourselves, and remember we're all in this together.